Let's begin with some wake-up words of Shelley. Prometheus Unbound, the spirit of the hour enters Act 3, Scene 4, very far into the drama. And Prometheus says, "We feel what thou hast heard and seen, yet speak." The spirit of the hour, taking his cue from Prometheus, puts visionary words into play. What Prometheus has said is that my realm is a realm of myth. Prometheus lives in a realm of myth, and in that mythic realm, he has conserved a secret of man from Zeus, from the gods. A secret of man has been conserved and hidden away from the gods. Just what it can do, no one knows on the mythic level. Only in visionary language can someone begin to express what it can do. And so the spirit of the hour, using visionary, prophetic language, magic language, speaks. Soon as the sound had ceased, whose thunder filled the abysses of the sky and the wide earth, there was a change. The impalpable thin air and the all-encircling sunlight were transformed, as if the sense of love dissolved in them, had folded itself round the sphered world. My vision then grew clear, and I could see into the mysteries of the universe. Dizzy as with delight, I floated down, winnowing the lightsome air with languid plumes. My coursers sought their birthplace in the sun, whence they henceforth will live exempt from toil, pasturing flowers of vegetable fire. And where my moonlike car will stand within a temple gazed upon by Phidian forms of thee and Asia and the earth and me, and you, fair nymphs, looking the love we feel. In memory of the tidings it has borne, beneath the dome fretted with graven flowers, poised on 12 columns of resplendent stone, and open to the bright and liquid sky. This kind of language never appears in myth. There is not a myth in the world that has that kind of language in it. This is a magic language. It is a visionary language, and it is characterized by an ability to look forward. It has a prophetic cast to its angle of declamation. It looks forward. Where mythic language always looks back, even when talking about something seemingly that would be forward, it's always in terms of looking back. So that you can draw a very simple schematic for yourselves in your mind. Mythic language always starts from a dot and arrows backwards. Visionary language always starts from a dot and angles forwards. An artistic language we will find in the next quarter that we come to starts from a dot and arrows both ways. An artistic language has equilibrium. One of the great distinctive qualities of a world-class education is to deliver to its students this indelible, universal intelligence about how to say what you want to say in the right way. It has nothing to do with rules of rhetoric. It has everything to do with the truth that can be spoken. So we need to imagine for ourselves now a 4-level schemata. We need to open our minds, and in these 4 levels, we'll put on the top one myth, and on the second one symbol, on the third one vision, and on the fourth one art. And on myth, we'll have a dot with an arrow going back. On vision, we'll have a dot with an arrow going forward. And on art, we'll have a dot with the arrows going both ways. On symbol, we will simply have the dot. This is a diagrammatic way of visualizing for ourselves an enormous transformation that happens in almost every human being that you will meet, and does not happen in any other life form on the planet. Does not happen in any other life form on the planet. There are many life forms on this planet that share with man a ritual intelligence. Ants, dolphins, whales, gorillas, many dogs, horses, even horses, that share with man a ritual intelligence. None of them speak, even at the mythic level. Of course, there are always the literary excursions like Cervantes, who had 2 dogs discover one night in Sevilla that they could speak, and spent the whole night telling each other their life stories. And in the morning, when they had heard of how men treated each other, they decided that they would not speak again, because if men found out, they would treat them the way they treat other men. And instead of living the lives of dogs, they would have to lead the lives of men. The language quality transforms. And we can say this, that a mythic language functions as imagination. Imagination. A visionary language functions as memory. There's a radical difference between imagination and memory. The earmark of imagination is that it functions within an integral field, distinct from a visionary language, or a magic language, if you like, distinct from a visionary language which functions as memory in a differential field. Confusing the two leads to a reductive flaw in the whole procedure of intelligence. Not just a reductive flaw, but the archetypal reductive flaw. And it can be stated in a very simple thing: one begins counting with 1 instead of 0. It seems simplistic just to say it that way, but the ramifications become immense. They become enormous. And as soon as one begins to apply differential computations of consciousness to the world, one ends up either with a reductive junkyard, very much like we're approaching now, or one ends up participating in a cosmos. The initial choice is determined by whether one begins counting with 0 or 1. The cosmos is a differential functioning of zero in its largest scope, infinity, whereas the reductive junkyard is always an increasingly alienated, isolated impossibility, cut off from everything, including its own source, its own base, and finally its own identity. So that with myth, on the first level, we want to have imagination, and we'd like to draw a line and then underneath that inscribe mentally integral. And on the third line, we would like to have, after vision, memory, and then a line, and inscribe underneath it differential. And we can say then that integral imagination and differential memory have their balancing. They have their balance, let's say, in only one place in reality, and that is at the very center of the mind. And that very center of the mind, which is the balance between integral imagination and differential memory, when projected out differentially into our body, the center of the person also is aligned to that soul center of the mind. And one again finds the balance between integral imagination and differential memory. So that the person includes all phases preceding it into a single prism and expressive of images and ideas, and has an ambidextrous sense of time. And the art of person making is to realize this achievement in one's person. This is very, very difficult to imagine, and you must now understand that by just using imagination, you're only using the beginning of what is actually a sequence of processes. And if you lean on imagination exclusively, you will only come out with an imagined variant that has reality only on the mythic level and doesn't go any further than that. This, unfortunately, is the state of most education. It's almost unbearable unless it were totally curable. So we can say this, and these are tried and true wisdom statements, just simply brought current in terms of this education. The imagination, as it functions, creates a space for the mind. The functioning of imagination literally creates an inner space. And that inner space is where the mind comes into being. Whereas memory creates a matrix for the person. Memory creates a matrix for the person. One of the defining boundaries of hell is the river Lethe, forgetfulness. And once you have crossed over Lethe, you cannot become a person, and that's a part of the hell of hell. That's the hellishness of it. Forgetfulness. When imagination is fully developed and then emptied, mind pure occurs. Once you have developed the imagination and let it function, and then have the technique of emptying that imaginative space of images, what is left is pure mind. the Zen awareness. Very pure. That state of mind is called the soul. Not anything. People who have umpteen lectures on the soul and the nature of the soul just show by their glibness that they don't understand at all. There's not one thing that can be said about the soul other than that it occurs purely in this unique, special case of the mind. That's all that can be said. However, leading up to that, there's a great deal that can be said, but only mythically. And after that, there's a great deal that can be said, but it has to be said visionally and has to be recognized as such, and then it becomes intelligible. And though the two bodies of language relate to each other, they certainly do that. Their relationship is completely scrambled unless one has had that experience of the soul, that experience of the pure clarity of open emptiness. And we simply call that, the English word is in a long line of languages that have utilized words to express this, is called realization. And without you can't even give it a time denotation. It's not a split second. Hell, any science lab in the world already deals with millions of seconds. Split second is not only old-fashioned, but picoseconds are old-fashioned. But they're also too long to express what happens here. So one says spontaneously or instantaneously. Let's choose instantaneously, which means that this moment, the pure mind, does not occur in time. It does not occur in any kind of a series or a relational dynamic or a functional trajectory that could have its referent to nature as the movement of things in space, which is always one of the conditions of time. Time is a condition. Time certainly exists, but it exists as a form, and it has its birth, it has its generation, it has its old age, it has its death. Time is a being. Time is a being in the sense that it has its life. It has its life capacity. And when time has fulfilled its lifespan, its resonances fade out. And they fade out very rapidly. The fall off is extremely rapid. For instance, there are time forms of approximately 2,000 years. And they have certain characteristics. They have a kind of a mid-correction to them. They jump at the millennium. But about 200 years before the second millennium, they have a big crimp in their capacity. And they begin to run down. And the last 20 years, they just fall off. They tail off incredibly. And they tail off into fading. Homer expressed it in the Odyssey, where he talks about the nether world, the afterlife. He says that forms in that realm are like the fading flowers of asphodel that become fainter and fainter, and that the only way to vivify them, Odysseus finds, because he learns from Circe how to do this, is to bring a big bowl of blood. because blood will temporarily vivify the form so that they can speak again. And she says to him, then you can interrogate the fading forms of the dead and find the way to get home, because only the dead know the way for you to get home. No one living can tell you, for the gods have cursed you, but the dead are beyond the reach of the gods. And only if you can vivify them long enough to question them will you find your way home. And just to make a long story short and interesting, he finds that the only way to get home is to realize that the complete vehicle that carries him will have to be lost. In the Odyssey, it's his ship. Only two things will remain, the mast and the keel, but no ship. And only by lashing those two together to your very body will you be able to float on the ocean long enough to find the beginnings again when you can start your homecoming. Your body will have to be your only vehicle. You will have to give up everything else in the world. There'll be only the mast and the keel, like mocking parentheses, left to show you that the gods can erase everything in this world from you. But what they cannot erase is your body, unless you give it up. And if you don't, you can keep that. There's a very peculiar quality in this. The quality is this, that on the level of myth, language always refers back because nature is the referent for that language. All mythic languages have natural reference. So even someone who learned to speak and to write visionary language almost as good as it can ever be done, somebody like Dante. In Dante's theory of poetry, he makes it very clear to the neophyte coming up poets. He says, your language, when it begins, has to have natural reference. You can fly later on. You can have winged words later on. But to begin with, your language has to be mythic. It has to have natural reference. Because that's the only way that you can have something that's real then that will integrate to a vanishing. Because only nature integrates to a vanishing. If you assume any other stance for your language, it will not vanish, but it will integrate to one. That one, that oneness, will stick in your craw like a knife in the mind. You won't be able to go any deeper, further, finer than that. And you will expect to find its correlate out there. And you will search for something forever. And in this universe, there's no such thing as a something at all. And so it's a curse. The way out is not to get locked into that in the first place. The archetypal wisdom therapy is that there's no solution to this problem because there was no problem in the first place. Formulating your situation as a problem was the initial error. So like Shelley with the spirit of the hour, love dissolves all those barriers so that none of them exist any longer. And love can carry an integration below the threshold of one, can carry it all the way to vanishing. You can give it all up gladly. And the last stage of integration is always acceptance. Acceptance. This kind of equality is extremely difficult to follow unless we have an example. The example that we used initially in this course and began with, so that we would begin with a 0 rather than a 1, we began with the I Ching. We began our whole education with the I Ching because the original I Ching was a zero-based functioning integration. And what was characteristic at that time? We can come to our Ecumene pamphlet, this little 48-page pamphlet, and right at the very beginning of the course is nature. Nature on this side, page 8, and then page 9 is the 5-phase cycle. And the 5-phase cycle is the archetypal Chinese way of beginning with 0 and going completely through all the functional permutations of integration. It begins with Tao. Tao is 0. It moves Tao, Te, which is 1, Zhen, which is 2, Yi, which is 3, Li, which is 4, and then it factors back into 0 again, back into Tao. So you have the Tao, you have the Te, you have Zhen, where we are. You have Yi, where the mind is. And you have Li, which is the world, the 10,000 things, the world of multiplicity. And multiplicity factors back into 0 in an integration functional ecology without leaving a trace or a remainder. 0 accepts infinity logically with no leftovers whatsoever. It's the only condition. It's a unique condition, a unique logical condition. The Chinese functioned by this way for at least, I guess, close to 3,000 years. Ancient Chinese civilization functioned for at least 3,000 years in this way. The first time that it was questioned and changed, introduced a note into Chinese civilization that ended up as a fundamental flaw, which the Chinese have never shaken. The flaw occurred roughly around 300 BC. And we can take it as an example for ourselves. And pay attention to the fact that this happens not just because some individual like us is inexperienced or ignorant or perhaps even stupid or blind or whatever. And it doesn't just happen because we live in a country that's only a couple hundred years old and it's inexperienced, it's ignorant, or it's stupid, or whatever. Or in a Western civilization that has flaws, and that's why this and that's why that. It's not that at all. It's that all human experience is subject to this same archetypal flaw. And if it's not detected and dealt with and cured, it forever after functions as an error-generating element in whatever relationality is engendered. What am I saying? It's like having a typewriter with a key that's always going to come down randomly, and every time you use it, the joker in the deck is always, you know the word, right. So you can never get anything done right. Yeah. Right. What? Okay, question. It's like that that beautiful interrogation scene in Logan's Run that David Zelig Goodman put into Michael York's mouth, and he says to the computer, "Question?" And of course, the computer didn't reply, right? You've been given your instructions, Logan 5, right? All you were told was that the object is called Ankh, symbol for life. Nothing else. Question: what happened in Chinese civilization in 300 BC that flawed its civilization? Answer: a thinker named Su Yan came up with the yin-yang school of thought, codifying the 5 elements. And you say, in all humble surprise, that's it? What in the hell is that? What does that mean? Well, let's review it just for a minute or so, and let's see what that means, because it has a lot to do with what we're doing right now. If we come to something like Science and Civilization in China, big series of books from Cambridge University Press, nearly 20 volumes. In volume 2, page 232, Joseph Needham introduces, big headline, section C, under Fundamental Ideas of Chinese Science, the School of Naturalists, the Yin-Yang Chia, the School of Yin-Yang, Su Yan, and the origin and development of the 5-element theory. And this happened somewhere around 300 BC. And I'll leave it out so that some of you can look at it if you want. You can read it if you want and go into it. The development of yin-yang as a typological characterization of ultimate reality is an error. And one of the first indications of its erroneous procedural development is that the 5-phase energy cycle is reduced to 5 elements. Instead of phases of an energy cycle, one has 5 elements, 5 things, controlled by 2 thing processes, yin, yang. And almost all the writings that you have, not just by Westerners who are largely ignorant of Chinese civilization, but by Chinese who are ignorant of Chinese civilization also, of which there are many more. There are many more Chinese ignorant of Chinese civilization than there are Westerners ignorant of Chinese civilization. In fact, in the late 20th century, almost all the Taoists are here. Yeah, this here, LA. They're not in China. The development of an emphasis upon yin-yang rather than Tao is a fatal flaw, absolute fatal flaw. It leads to a peculiar quality. The peculiar quality is to consider that the ultimate form of the universe takes shape as a movement of yin and yang, and that somehow this is one of the most fundamental characteristics that there is. Needham goes into it. Many other writers go into it. It is something here. The moment has now come to explain the origin and meaning of the fundamental theories of the 2 forces in the universe, yin and yang, and the 5 elements. It would, strictly speaking, be proper to discuss the former before the latter. That is to discuss yin-yang before the latter, the five elements, since theoretically they lay, as it were, at a deeper level in nature and were the most ultimate principles of which the ancient Chinese could conceive. But it so happens that we know a great deal more about the historical origin of the five-element theory than we know of the yin and yang, and it will therefore be more convenient to deal with it first. They go back to a thinker, the real founder of Chinese science, named Su Yan. Su Yan's dates are 350 BC to about 270 BC. Just take 300 BC as a general statement. Now, as a matter of fact, there is no mention of five elements as a constitutive typology in Chinese civilization before Zuyan, before 300 BC. But there also is only a fleeting, sarcastic, humorous reference to yin-yang just shortly before 300 BC. And no references to yin-yang whatsoever as fundamental principles before that. I just finished polishing and collating a translation of the Tao Te Ching, and it never mentions yin-yang once. Lao Tzu doesn't mention yin-yang at all. And Chuangzi, who is a contemporary of Su Yan, a little bit older, not much older, 10 years, 20 years older than Su Yan, only mentions yin-yang in a kind of derisive way, and he locates it in one of the many states that China had become ground up in. The Zhou dynasty had become ground up into little warlord kingdoms, and one of them was named Qi, not the energy Qi, but just Qi. Here's the kind of humorous reference that Chuangzi makes about yin-yang. Yen Hui said, "Before I heard this, I was certain that I was Hui. But now that I have heard it, there is no more Hui. Can this be called emptiness?" Notice the Zen-like origins already in Chinese Taoist thought of Chuangzi 300 BC. I used to think I was Hui, but now that I've heard of the Tao, there is no more Hui. Can this be called emptiness? That's all there is to it, said Confucius. Now I will tell you, you may go and play in his birdcage, but never be moved by fame. If he listens, then sing. If not, keep still. Have no gate, no opening, but make oneness your house and live with what cannot be avoided. Then you will be close to success. It's easy to keep from walking. The hard thing is to walk without touching the ground. It's easy to cheat when you work for men, but hard to cheat when you work for heaven. You've heard of flying with wings, but you have never heard of flying without wings. You've heard of the knowledge that knows, but you have never heard of the knowledge that does not know? Look into that closed room, the empty chamber where brightness is born. Fortune and blessing gather where there is stillness. But if you do not keep still, this is all what is called sitting but racing around. Let your ears and eyes communicate with what is inside and put mind and knowledge on the outside. Then even gods and spirits will come to dwell, not to speak of men. This is the changing of the 10,000 things, the bond of Yu and Shen, legendary kings, the constant practice of Fu Shi, the founder of the I Ching. How much more should it be a rule for lesser men? Zhu Cao, Duke of Shi, who was being sent on a mission to Qi, then consulted Confucius. The king is sending me on a very important message. Qi will probably treat me with great honor and will be in no hurry to do anything more. Even a commoner cannot be forced to act, much less one of the feudal lords. I'm very worried about it. You said to me once, in all affairs, whether large or small, there are few men who reach a happy conclusion except through the way, except through Tao. If you do not succeed, you are bound to suffer from the judgment of men. If you do succeed, you're bound to suffer from the yin and the yang. To suffer no harm whether you succeed or not, only the man who has virtue can do that. Notice here that yin and yang are used humorously derisively. There are many references in Chuang-Tzu like this. One other. Chapter 11, the translator here translates this chapter as "Let it be, leave it alone," where he says, I have heard from you, sir, that you have mastered the perfect way, the perfect Tao. I venture to ask you about the governing of the body. What should I do in order to live a long life? Master Kuang Chen sat up with a start. Excellent, this question of yours. Come, I will tell you about perfect Tao. The essence of perfect Tao is deep and darkly shrouded. The extreme of the perfect way is mysterious and hushed in silence. Let there be no seeing, no hearing. Enfold the spirit in quietude, and the body will right itself. Be still, be pure. Do not labor your body. Do not churn up your essence, and then you can live a long life. When the eye does not see, the ear does not hear, and the mind does not know, then your spirit will protect the body, and the body will enjoy long life. Be cautious of what is within you. Block off what is outside you, for much knowledge will do you harm. Then I will lead you up above the great brilliance to the source of the perfect yang. I will guide you through the dark and mysterious gate to the source of the perfect yin. Heaven and earth have their controllers, and the yin and yang their storehouses. Only take care and guard your own body. These other things will of themselves grow sturdy. So the whole development of yin and yang takes place after 300 BC. A contemporary of Chuang-Tzu and Tzu-Yen, Mencius, doesn't talk about yin and yang at all. He doesn't talk about the 5 elements at all. He talks about the ancient wisdom of goodness, of benevolence, of righteousness, and all of these are keyed to the term Zhen. And the Chinese character for Zhen is written with the root of the character for man and an extra radical, which is the character for two. Man's two-ness is his essential heart. Man's two-ness. If you have started with one, you will hear two-ness as duality. And that's wrong. You have to put a red pencil check mark there. No. No. Once that duality is heard, you can never get rid of it. Why? Because it's a stain that goes into the fiber of the fabric. It's not a content stenciled on the fabric. It becomes a part of that fabric. Then the only way to get rid of it is through complete enlightenment. That's hard. That is really hard. The only way to deal with it is that when it comes up to see it in terms that can never be resolved in a false integration. Now, in the West dealt with this problem before the Chinese. The West dealt with this problem about 150 years before the Chinese dealt with it. And the person in the West who dealt with this was Pythagoras. Whereas the person in China who dealt with this actually lived about 200 years after Tzu-Yen, so about 350 years after Pythagoras. His name was Prince Liu of Huainan, one of the great, brilliant intellects in Chinese history. Liu, Prince Liu, Huainan. And his book, The Huainan Zoo, has never been completely translated in English ever. My teacher was going to do it, and when he died in 1975, there wasn't anybody around who was subtle enough to do it. And when I realized that Master Ni was subtle enough to do it and brought it up to him, he said he just didn't have the capacity and time to do it. The Chinese edition is in 6 volumes. Is that it for today? Let's cuff them. Let's come back. I won't miss it. Okay. Good. Was Pythagoras Chinese? Well, of course, Pythagoras was not Chinese, but the whole contention here is that there is an enormous parallel between the way in which Pythagoras and his mathematics parallels the way in which Chinese mathematics developed. The two are very close to each other. In fact, if you come to the 2nd volume of Feng Yulan's History of Chinese Philosophy, Princeton University Press, great big huge tomes. If you come to volume 2, and you come to page 94, you will find a Pythagorean schemata of numbers on the bottom of the page. Yeah. And you recognize here, some of you who are acquainted with Western philosophic thought and lore, the presentation of square numbers and oblong numbers. Pythagorean square numbers have to do with limit. Square numbers are always limited, whereas oblong numbers are always unlimited. The same here in Chinese. The yang was always a limit, and the yin was always an unlimited. And this idea never occurred in China before Tzu-Yen. That is to say, there were sketches in the generation just before Tzu-Yen where people were talking about yin and yang. But it was kind of like a fad, so that somebody like Chuangzi was making fun of it. Whereas in Tzu-Yen's generation, he's a contemporary of Aristotle, he reduces down, like Aristotle reduces down, what was a perfectly viable integral education. He reduces it down so it becomes easier to deal with, quote, easier to, quote, learn. And it ends up by creating very serious problems. One of the problems that comes out of Aristotelian politics is the incessant warring of Hellenistic kings, each of them saying that they are God, and ending up with one kingdom finally saying that its king is a god, and that was Augustus and Rome. And later on, even Hellenistic Judaism, in its version of Jesus' teaching, was converted into this system of a political realm headed by a god. It is a problem which is not just characteristic of the West, or of Roman thought, or of Jewish thought, or of Christian thought. It's characteristic of human thought, because the same thing happened in China. And within 4 generations of Tzu Yan's positing of yin-yang as real things, and reducing the 5-phase energy cycle to 5 elements, which are fundamental things, you have the rise of a universal emperor in China, a man who took the name Shi Huangti, the man who built the Great Wall of China. He also ushered in the very first huge bonfire of books. The burning of books in China happened in 213 BC. They burnt every copy of every book except the handful of books that were saved out by Shi Huangti for his civil service exam system. And unbelievably, fortunately, the I Ching survived in that selection. He chose 5 classics. Everyone will read only these 5 classics, and how well you do on only these 5 classics will be the pecking order of the jobs assigned to you. There can be any discussion that you want, but they have to be only on these 5 books, and only in terms of our state exam. And that formal, political, functioning tool lasted until 1911. So the West doesn't have to be ashamed vis-a-vis China at all about political faux pas, about human stupidity. And they can goddamn well apologize to us before we say one word. Excuse me. Thought I'd get that in. So I very much love the way the Chinese are. But what I'm trying to say here, somewhat humorously with this aside, this is a human problem, and the source of its erroneous root can be laid to the fact that 1 begins to count with 1 instead of 0. If you start with 0, the first movement in the universe is unity. If you start with 1, the first movement in the universe is duality. Again, that sets up a proliferation of endless varieties of truth tree testing to see whether you're real or not. And they never resolve. That process never resolves. It resolves partially, always, and the partiality eventually leads to accepting, as it did in the late 20th century, that probability is the only scientific gauge of truthfulness. So we go with its probability, not with its actuality. Whereas the universe, in both nature and the cosmos, is distinguished by infinitesimal actuality. I can't stress this enough. If you have a DNA code as thick as the New York Central phone book, if you change only about 1/1,000,000th of 1% of that DNA code, you're going to get a dog instead of a pine tree. Holy telephone book, Batman. The universe, both as nature and as cosmos, is exceedingly truthful. Mother Nature is very honest. How honest? She is exactingly honest. She likes for her children to tell the truth. She loves that. A being who is truthful has Mother Nature's blessing infinitely. She seals you with grace. No way anything can happen untoward. No way. When the functioning of Tao was first envisioned, you have this kind of an intertwining of dragon people, male and female, in this case Fuxi and Nuqua, which in 3000 BC were the mythic images of the way in which Tao functions in human life. And you have Fuxi and Nuqua intertwined, their tails intertwined. And if you turn this way, you get the Hermetic caduceus in the West. It's a whole way of understanding reality works. And it's real because it works. Its functioning that actually occurs is the guarantee that the energy at that phase functions as existence. Where oneness occurs, where unity occurs, where te happens, that's existence. The source of that existence is most certainly the Tao of nature, or Tao as nature, or just Tao, or just nature. Most certainly. There's no doubt whatsoever. But if you start counting with 1 instead of 0, you retroactively, regressively posit existence to nature, and that's not true. Or you posit existence to Tao. Tao is a thing. The Tao is a thing. And the first stage of getting it expressed is yin and yang. The books are full of this. It's junk. It's not Taoist at all. It's so yinist. It's Aristotelian. It isn't Pythagorean. Now, higher mathematics everywhere in the world is Pythagorean, and nowhere in the world is it Aristotelian. It's absolutely true. I was privy to overhear a conversation at Caltech one time, and the guy was saying, well, we're all still Pythagoreans around here. And it's absolutely true. None of them are Aristotelians. It's a myth that Aristotle was the father of exact sciences. He was not the father of exact sciences. He was the father of medieval metaphysics. Pythagoras is the father of exact science. Because the language of vision is very much like mathematics. Mathematics is a universal language of vision. It was thought so, it was conceived so by Newton, by Leibniz, by all the developments all along the line. There are very conscious men and women who developed all of this. very conscious people, is a visionary language and has this prophetic quality of looking forward, and that's why really science is predictive and runs a very close track to religion, which is prophetic, and the war between science and religion is like a made-up war of jealousy of twins. Prophecy and prediction, and it's still in the tabloids and the minds of tabloid people, which is almost everybody, still waged daily. Big Bang or creation? The resolution of that kind of ignorance is what an education should provide. An education that's worth the money that you pay for it, worth the time that you invest in it, worth your life energy that you bring into play with it, needs to make that clear for you, or at least clear for your inspection. You don't have to accept it. You make your own choice. But you should be able to see it laid out on the table before you, and you in your own privacy, you make that choice. You ought to have the right of that choice. Now, that's not my standpoint exclusively. It's a standpoint that was first uttered in the kind of insistent language which I use. The first person to use that in this way was Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin, his little notebook of keeping track of 14 qualities of personality every hour of the day for days and weeks on end, to chart and see how it was that he assessed himself and to try and get some kind of accurate shape of who he was. This kind of an approach is what this education is all about. This is a grown-up version of Benjamin Franklin's little notebook of 250 years ago. And hopefully the education will get out at least by 2006 for the 300th birthday of Benjamin Franklin. And if it gets out by 2006, I'll be happy as a little puppy. Let's come back. Was Pythagoras Chinese? Let's come back to yin and yang. Let's come back to square numbers and oblong numbers. Let's come back that square numbers are limit, yang limit, yin unlimited. Now, one of the indelible Pythagorean realizations that the outer circle people heard about and the inner circle people were able to vision. The acousmatiki could hear about it and the mathematiki could vision it for themselves, was that unlimited means unlimited. Now, how are you going to make a concept out of it? Only by sleight of hand cheating can you make a concept of unlimited. There's no way. What form does the unlimited have? Whatever form you say, it's beyond that. It's the old way. Parmenides, in his Pythagorean training in Elea, came with this beautiful kind of quality of saying what is, and what isn't, isn't. And they are disjunctive. The way that they function really is that they never meet. The way that yin-yang function is that they never meet. Otherwise, they wouldn't function as what they are. And if they never meet, then a symbolic form that shows their integration is nonsense. Now, this can be followed up. I mean, we can now, at this stage of the game, with Markov chains and everything, we can show you the math. Believe me, it can be shown. You want details? Get ready. It's like a tidal wave. The 21st century is going to completely ignore 99, what was Ivory Soap? 99 and 44 100ths? Yeah, yeah. Only 56 hundredths of all the information that you think is necessary is going to be left after the 21st century gets through with it. Boom, combing it out. The next 3 generations of human beings are just simply going to comb the snarls. And what's going to be left is a lot of hair on the floor and some beautiful people who can go bareheaded anywhere in the cosmos. But by the 22nd century, they'll be ready to go. Arms around each other saying, let's go. Because when man learns to sing together like that, the morning stars will invite them. They say, you want to go faster than light? Here's how. Come on and see us. Remember, Brother Antoninus at a poetry reading at the Newman Center in Berkeley one time said that Mae West delivered the universal invitation. Come up and see me sometime. That's what Mother Universe says when we're ready, with our arms around each other, ready to sing. Come on and join the choir. You don't have to worry about the speed of light. You have to worry about distances of millions of light years, much less 4 light years just to be at the Centauri star system, which I hear is a gas. It has 4 stars. It's just, I mean, deciding when dawn is really fantastic. Okay, you get it. You get it. You get it. Okay. Now, somebody bought me these 2 volumes, Possibility and Necessity. Jean Piaget's, one of his works in 2 volumes, and pointed out at the end of volume 2 in the conclusions, Piaget, who did yeoman labor looking at how children learn, the learning of human beings, patiently for decades and decades. Wonderful, wonderful attentiveness. The principal results of the present research can be summarized in the following 3 points. 1, necessity pertains to the compositions carried out by the subject and is not an observable datum inherent in objects. 2, it is not an isolated and definitive state, but the result of a process. 3, it is directly related to the constituting of possibilities that generate differentiations, whereas necessity is related to integration. Hence, the 2 formations are in equilibrium. Integration and differentiation. Now, you can test this education any way that you want to. It's been made to undergo whatever tests can be imagined, and it will integrate itself to realization every single time. Every single time. Why? Because it's been carried further through every conceivable test of differentiation so that it leads to freedom every single time also. It's not enough to have the process of cupellation burn away all the dross and leave only the gold. You have to have that gold also come into play in such a way that it leads to immortality. Both those are issues of real alchemy. You have to be able to find the gold of realization, but you have to be able to apply it in such a way that you live forever. That way you have soul and cosmos. Anything less than that is used car salesman stuff. It has no place in any kind of seriousness where somebody's actually charging you money for it, accepting your time for it, and expecting that you're going to be able to use it in life actually. Those are kind of like Hollywood terms in a way, but at least it carries it across. let's come back to where we began and then try to work our way towards Shakespeare and Shelley as a pair. Myth, symbol, vision, art. Now, last year we closed out the second half with myth and symbol. And the first half of this year is vision and art. And we're now at vision 10. That means a month from now, 4 weeks from now, we'll be at art 1. Vision 11, 12, the interval, and then art 1. So exactly 4 weeks from now, we'll be at art 1. And when we get to art 1, where will we be in terms of our little methodology? Remember, our method here is not to use books. It's not a great books program. But to use pairs of books, which involves tensor matrices, and one gets a whole different kind of consciousness from this. What kind of consciousness? Instead of a consciousness which uses diagrammatic geometry as its confirming referent, one uses trigonometric sphericality in full consonances in order to confirm. It's an enormous difference. Enormous difference. It's the difference between Euclid and Kepler. I love Euclid. He was fabulous. But he never, bless his soul, saw what Kepler was the first to say. That the universe is so perfect in its playfulness that even the orbits of planets and stars can be less than perfect circles. That God is so good at it that he can have planets and stars in orbits that are not perfect circles. Whereas the flaw of starting with 1 in the mind led to the expectation that orbits have to be perfect circles. And if they're not, there's something wrong with God. Whereas there was something wrong with those people thinking that way. And only when one understands Kepler's vision. He had a vision that the center of an orbital structure, the true center, the very center of an orbital structure, does not have to be a thing. That in fact, the elliptical complementation, say of like the Earth and the Sun, is such that they both revolve around a common point in space, which is no thing. And that's how you get the accurate computation of the Earth's orbit, or the Moon's orbit, or Mars's orbit, Jupiter's orbit. Kepler did a lot of work with Mars and Jupiter, and later on Einstein's computations were in terms of Mercury, because Maxwell, like Kepler, had taken it even further and refined it to such that a man named Michelson could do actual physical experiments that would show to the nth degree exactly what an orbit in an electromagnetic field is. For Earth, for Mercury, for whatever. And it's only on that basis of exactness that someone could envision and express in an amulet so precisely E equals mc squared. And someone like Robert Oppenheimer, just 2 generations later, could take that amulet in its talismanic application and make an atomic bomb. That is unbelievable. It's incontrovertible. Go ahead and deny it. It's all based on exactness, and the exactness comes because one has the intelligence to factor 0 in as the true source of all progressions. Now, even Euclid understood that, but he couldn't factor it in dynamic spherical functions. The very first part of Euclid's geometry, elements of geometry, the elements, notice elements, the very first axiom is about a point. A point is a locus of no dimension. Axiom number 1 in Euclid already, because he still remembered the ancient wisdom, still a Pythagorean, still a mathematiki, still knew because he himself had sat still enough to be a locus of no dimension. He knew that that's what real is. And when that operates, it operates in such a, quote, magical way, such a visionary way, that the whole realm of universal consciousness actually occurs and actually happens. And it's real, absolutely real. Real to the nth degree, whatever exactness you'd like. So that somebody lovable like George Gamow could even use as a title of one of his books, 1, 2, 3, ellipsis, infinity. You can express anything that you want exactly, including, realistically, imaginary numbers. It is absolutely astounding that this should be true. But what's astonishing on top of the astounding is not only is it true, but that this universe of materiality, of existence, takes whatever forms we give to it. Whatever a magician says happens. If that magician says it in the exact right way, this universe is that. It distributes its existence exactly according to that form. No way that doesn't happen. No way that doesn't happen. So in an odd way, by the subterranean back door, it's very easy to understand a universal intelligence saying, let there be light, and there was light. It's very easy to understand that. But it isn't mythic. No way that it's mythic. No way. But the scientific understanding of that is not only approachable and probable, but predictable. When? At least by 2066. At least by then. Mathematically showable. Now let's come back to myth, symbol, vision, and art. And notice here that there's a progression here, and that the progression, the functioning progression, it's like the 5-phase energy cycle in the Tao. Once one flows in that energy cycle, one can flow infinitely in that cycle, and all permutations and variations, including unique, novel newness, function in a factorial way where there is no remnant left over after the ecology runs itself through. Nothing is left out. Everything that goes in and is real and differentiates and is apparent comes back, and nothing is left out whatsoever. So that if we function in our education in this way, if we flow through these phases in the right way, if we began with nature and followed it up by ritual and understood that, then this whole sequence of myth, symbol, vision, art, that square, that limit square, that square founds itself on existence just like a pillar resting on its platform. And if that pillar, if that square, myth, symbol, vision, art, is square on existence on ritual, then you can put another platform called history on it, and it'll stay. And the parallels of history and ritual, which never meet, will be nevertheless part of a structure of the real, held firmly together in their parallelness by this square. If this square is not true, if this square is not made true, if one is not a good carpenter, if you're not a good carpenter of the Spirit, and you didn't square this right, slowly, somehow, history, in some skew or other, will run into ritual. And that's where you get the Nazis of this universe. That's a crack in the mind. That juncture is a crack in the mind. It's like a flaw. It's like you can have whatever beautiful, valuable bowl you want. When it's cracked, when it's fractured like that, you have to throw it away. There's no way. Excuse me, there's no way Hitler was right. Not just speaking from Jewish standpoint, speaking from archetypal universal standpoint. There's no way Augustus Caesar was right. There's no way that Shi Huangti was right at all. There isn't any possibility in any universe where they would be right. So that where we are right now in vision, we're moving, or in vision 10, we're moving to vision 12. Once we get to vision 12, we'll be in possession of something archetypal. When we're in possession of vision 12, we will have 3 of the 4 corners. We'll have myth, we'll have symbol, we'll have vision. Uncle Carl Jung writes several times in the collected works. He says that in a therapy, when somebody gets to the point of having 3 parts of the square of the whole, they can then on their own intuit the 4th part. If you give somebody 3 corners of a square, they know enough, they have enough on their own to be able to get to that 4th quarter on their own. You don't have to show them that. And this is why, quoting another wonderful human being, Frank Lloyd Wright, this is why art is not teachable. The artist has to discover for themselves their own 4th quarter, their own 4th corner, their own wholeness. They have to discover that. And in whatever way they come to that, that's the love of their life. However they come to that, that's for them. And for some guru, some teacher, some, who cares what they call them these days, to do that for you, preempting your freedom, preempting your own truthfulness, it's time to pull their plug. What does Jean Harlow say in China Seas? When I want to hear from you, Golden Bell, I'll pull your gong. Just think of the money you're going to save, not having to queue up to the guru crowd. It's extremely important to realize that at this particular juncture, this education works with exactness. And the kind of exactness that it has is not an exactness that I need to spell out, but an exactness which you in your own way can now play with. And the whole 3 months of art are an invitation for you to play with it in whatever way feels good to you. And when we get to art, the very first thing that we have is a pair of books. We're back to that. Remember before the break? Is not a great books. The Great Books program is an Aristotelian reductive mentality. God bless Mortimer Adler. It doesn't work. It's never going to work. in 1945 when they held the great general education colloquium after the Second World War, and they went into this time after time after time trying to get an educational situation that would work. I have the books here. It was done at Harvard. When they were making the UN, they were also making general education. We got to have a way where human beings can be educated because we can't afford to keep doing this. World War I, World War II, how we can't afford to do this. We're going to have to teach people in such a way that their own humanity will keep them from going off the deep end. It hasn't happened yet. And we just postponed World War III by one generation. It's just been postponed. The Soviets are not going to be a player, but the game is still afoot. What we need to do is call in the cards. Nobody needs to play that game. Nuclear chicken, no one needs to play that game. That's not what electrons and neutrons and protons are about. That's not what E equals mc squared is about. It's about the ability to envision so exactly that you can bring fundamental energy into play and create forms that spontaneously redistribute the universe in a way in which stars can sing together and men and women can put their arms around each other's shoulders and sing with the stars. That's what it's all about. Not about Star Wars, but about star songs. I think JFK used to. The very first pair of books in art are Kandinsky and John Dewey. Kandinsky's Concerning the Spiritual in Art, and Dewey's Art as Experience. Two very different yet wonderfully sympathetic presentations of how to leave someone alone for them to find the fourth corner of their own art. Kandinsky's book coming as the very first visionary expression that was so necessary when art became capable of abstractions equaling those of mathematics. And Kandinsky's abstract art is very much about the same time that Einstein's working out E equals mc squared. Kandinsky and Einstein, very much contemporaries. Very much a kind of two cats stalking the same mouse kind of situation. Thankfully, Kandinsky is enough of a universal mystic as well as a world-class artist to be able to understand, because he had realized himself, understand what it was that he was doing. And when he would murmur about these things to his friends, his lady Gabriele Munter and his friends Franz Marc or Robert Delaunay or all of that crowd in Munich. In Munich. It's interesting that abstract art got its first expression in Munich, and that exactly a generation later, it was the site of betrayal for a whole world order. Munich, which had become synonymous in the art circles with the expressionist exactness of how abstraction is spiritual, became the very place where political betrayal on a world-class scale happens. And Dewey, with Art as Experience, understanding, because he and his wife Evelyn had, when their years in Chicago, had tried school after school after school. It was a Chicago where there was Frank Lloyd Wright and Jane Addams and many geniuses. Chicago of turn of the century was a fantastic place. and he and his wife wrote a book called Schools of Tomorrow. And he realized that the kicker in the whole works is art. That children, in order to continue to be who they are and to continue to learn in any kind of open way, have to be artists in their own right. They have to be artists. And so art as experience is the mature John Dewey coming finally to understand in retrospect that this was what was missing from our education, and that progressive education was almost there but didn't really get there because one has to have art as a basic quality in it, not integrated into it. All the school systems talk about integrating art into the programs. It's wrong. Art differentiates. It's in the differentiation cycle. You have to differentiate art into consciousness. When you do that, then art is real. Otherwise, all that you end up with are somebody's pet ideas of what art is, and you get this arts funding fiasco type stuff indefinitely. And there are no artists that come out of that. You will never find artists who will talk about their art. But occasionally you will find artists like Kandinsky who will talk about how not to talk about art. So that you ask those stupid questions, will you talk about art? And that's what Concerning the Spiritual and Art is about. And art as experience is a philosopher pragmatically looking at his incapacity in old ways to ever experience art, and how when he does experience art, it modified his whole logical procedure. Because the book that comes out right after he does Art as Experience is Logic, a Theory of Inquiry, with Arthur Bentley. Yeah. That logic is not knowing the answers beforehand and then as a cookie cutter stamping other people's ideas with this to see what's left over. Oh, you were smart here, but all this is dumb. That's not only wrong in education and in art, but in logic. It doesn't really work that way. The exactness of the mind is God's gift, but it doesn't work that way. No cookie cutters. No, that doesn't work. Whitman said, truthfully in Democratic Vistas, he said, I can now see that Mother Nature prefers only two things, freedom and variability. That's what she happens to like. And so we ought to try to live as human beings, at least allowing freedom and variability to function. And if we can go that far, we may have a kind of a world where we can discover other things. So instead of yin and yang, we need freedom and variability. That's where the real Tao is. The real Tai Chi. Freedom and variability. That's what consciousness is about. Next week, The Tempest and Prometheus Unbound.